Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Rosewood Event Venue. I'm so happy that you're here today. This is a My Story series. This is something that we started 9 months ago. And we started it because we have a platform here at Rosewood. And we also know that advertising is about telling stories, and it's about telling stories on multiple platforms. So this is a platform, and we've had many people come up here and tell their story about their life, about their journey on authoring a book, their journey in opening a business, and a journey about how to be a speaker. And my good friend Doug is here. And then Doug introduced me to this guy. And I'm so happy to meet this guy, Spencer. And this is his platform tonight. It's not about him as far as running for mayor, but it's about Spencer Duncan, who Spencer Duncan is, and he can take questions. I'm sure he's going to tell you all about himself. And,
maybe. Nobody wants to know that.
Hope we learn a little bit more about him. But let's give it up for Spencer tonight. Welcome, my friend. Take it away.
All right, I appreciate it. They told me I didn't need a mic because I'm pretty loud as a general rule. This was a little harder than I thought it would be. Anyone who knows me knows I talk a lot. That's never my problem. But when you actually have to sit down and tell your story, it gets suddenly a little more complicated, right? But they always tell you, if you don't tell your story, who's going to? And then the flip side of that is, what story do you tell, right? And I think part of the reason I was here, as mentioned, was because I am on the Topeka City Council. But I don't think that's why I'm here. I think that's how I got to meet Jim and how we got the connection and how I ended up doing this tonight. So I'm not going to talk about being on the city council because that's not that exciting, to be perfectly honest with you, right? And I'm not going to talk about running for mayor, although I am, so please vote for me, right? But I'm going to talk about, as I did this, reflect on what made me suddenly wake up one day in my 40s and say, I'm going to run for public office, right? What was it? What was that journey? And what is that story? And what are a few things in my life that got me to that point that made me want to be a public servant from that perspective? Because running for office is hard. You have to beg people for money. Some of them are your friends. Some of them you kind of know. Some of them are random strangers because it costs money. You have to try not to let them down once they give you money and once you may or may not win, and then, take that trust in them and not disappoint them. They always say that's part of running for offices. You go around and you make a bunch of promises, then you disappoint your friends, and you go ask them to do it all over again years later. That's sort of the political process. And the truth is, no matter how good of an elected official you are, you're always going to let somebody down, and you're always going to make someone mad, right? That is just the nature of public service, and you just have to kind of power through that. So when I sat down and I asked myself, what part of my story should I tell? I found myself, like I said, reflecting on what are a few things in my life that got me to even want to jump into that craziness. And that being here forced me to take a look, and that was a good thing. I'm not sure I'd ever reflected on it in that respect ever before in my life. So I've broken this down into a few pieces, a few stories. These are some of the moments that put me down that path. There are a few things because, I'm not that young, so I've had a nice long life to this point. So there are a few things we don't have time to get into, like growing up with two brothers in a politically divided household. My mom's a lifelong Democrat, my father's a lifelong Republican, but 51 years later, they're still out there debating, so they've made it work from their two sides of the aisle. I owned my first business when I was in my early 20s. It was a wine shop, a liquor store in Lawrence, Kansas, right? That's a journey unto itself. Unless you want to count, Richard Nance and I did in my old neighborhood when we were like 12 or 13, run a stationery business. We printed everything on his dad's printer. Cost of goods was great because we just took everything out of his dad's office, printed it off, and went and sold it. I don't think his dad was too happy about that afterwards, but that may have been my first real business. But other than that, I owned my first business in my 20s. I won't spend a lot of time talking about the fact that for 17 years I ran an association and management company where I was executive director of multiple associations from Kansas Pest Control. I know way more about bugs than people realize when I start talking to them, and I can say things and like, how do you know that? Or when I represented the Kansas Organization of Recyclers. We don't have a lot of time for telling any funny stories or weird stories about my work as a licensed private detective, which I am, and I continue to be, which is why when people say, how did you know that? I said, I got the license. That's how I figure things out. I won't talk at all about my current job as Government Affairs Director for the League of Kansas Municipalities. When you talk to kids groups and you say league, they think it's some kind of superhero organization. It's not. We just represent all the cities of Kansas. But that benefits me as an elected official because I get to go around the state and work with all the other cities and say, that's a great idea, why aren't we doing it in Topeka? Or when we talk about it here, say, no, don't do it. Terrible idea, run, because I've seen how it doesn't work. And lastly, I won't talk much about how my wife and I both grew up here in Topeka, right? We never met though. We actually found each other online on the internet, as happens in this day and age. And when I told everyone I was getting married, I was the last friend who they said, no way, we never thought that would happen. Is this a joke? Or yeah, I said, no, it's happening. So we won't have time to get into those pieces of my life. But here are a few stories that I think matter as I thought this through that brought me to the point of being one of 10 people who does get to make laws here in the city of Topeka. So story one is when I was fired. If you've never been fired, good for you. And if you have been fired before, good for you too. Because it's actually good sometimes to get fired. I've been fired a few times. First time I was fired was by my grandparents when I was 16 years old for mowing their lawn because I wasn't cutting straight and I was missing spots. So they were like, no more, kid. We love you, but you're out. The next question, though, is how many of you have ever been fired and made headlines all across the state of Kansas? Because I have, and I am in that small group of people that's been there. And honestly, it sounds a little weird, but I actually wear that as a badge of honor. The University Daily Kansan, which is the official newspaper of the University of Kansas, was founded in 1904. It's had over 200 editors-in-chiefs, and I am the only one in that history who's ever been fired from that position. I actually tell them in the journalism school I deserve a plaque. They think I'm joking every time I say it. I'm not. I really want my plaque. I think I've earned that. I deserve it. That event made state and even national news. Not because of why it happened, but because it had happened, because I was the first one. This was in the late 90s, and I'm the first one in over 100 plus years who'd ever been fired. The official reason at the time was that I was going to go rogue, that they were worried that with 8 issues left in the semester, the board of directors that oversaw the Kansan feared that I was going to go wild and crazy on my way out the door. They pointed to a few what they considered risque headlines and inappropriate captions that had been in the paper throughout the semester. One of them was inappropriate, and we actually suspended that kid, but still, they used that, they put that on me when they fired me. There was a few headlines that were actually pretty good. Our advisor at the time even said, very creative. Turns out some of them didn't like it as the reasons to fire me. The board that fired me was made up of students and faculty, but every journalism professor in that school and the paper's advisor all opposed it. They all came out and said that I shouldn't have been fired, that they couldn't believe it happened to me, that they'd had way worse editors-in-chiefs in the previous 100 plus years that never got fired. But the votes to remove me came from outside the journalism school, including allies of the chancellor. So Spencer, what really happened? Now, this is my version, and sadly, most of the other people are no longer with us. They have all passed on, so I guess I get to tell my story, but this is really what happened. I'd actually spent 3 years prior writing for the paper, including as a columnist, and I had a bit of a reputation on campus, which I had cultivated, and people liked to read me, and even the advisor said, yeah, people always read his stuff, but the administration didn't always like that, right? I got yelled at a lot. I got called to the provost and the chancellor's office a few times throughout the years, but we always worked it out. Roy Williams, the legendary basketball coach, called me once to his office and had some words for me. I've also been yelled at by Coach Mike Krzyzewski of Duke, former legendary coach. So I do tell people, when you yell at me, you have a high bar to reach. I've been yelled at by some of the best, right? So I had sort of built that reputation before. It was college, right? And right before I became editor, the university signed a contract with Coca-Cola. Now, this was in late 90s, so this was before, as universities were doing contracts specifically with different soda companies. And until then, all concessions were handled in-house by 9 employees who did all the concessions for the university. When they made this deal, they told those folks, you will still have a job. And then right before the semester started, they fired them all. So first issue of the Kansan, that was our big story. Big old headline splashed right across the front page, how the university lied to these 9 people, put them out of a job. It was a shady deal. Coca-Cola was evil because this happened. That was essentially our story. It was an accurate story. It was well written. All the professors said, good job, you did the work. The Chancellor Robert Hemingway at the time, was not a happy man. He came to my office to yell at me. There's a lot of yelling, as you'll notice, throughout my early career in this world. But it probably didn't help, too, that when he came to yell at me, I'd put a Pepsi clock in my editor's office, because that's the kind of, again, person that I was at times, right? I still kind of am, right? But we kept reporting real stories throughout the year. The administration kept getting upset, but our professors kept reminding us, that's your job. You're doing what you're supposed to. So we get to 2 weeks before the semester's over, 8, 9 issues to go, about 10 issues to go, and we ran a story about the chancellor's wife. And what she had been doing was, if anyone knows, the chancellor's house is right in the middle of campus in part of this giant parking lot. Once a week, she would close off the parking lot and host private tea parties. She was not a university employee. These were not university parties. So we ran a story about how this lot, which was paid, students paid for to park there, was being used once a week, very tight parking for these tea parties. Again, Chancellor was not happy. Gives me a call, tells me his wife should be off limits. I'm in trouble. Boom, 24 hours later, they called a board meeting, and I was fired. So this news broke right before Thanksgiving. We were about to go on Thanksgiving break, and I had already planned to visit family in Chicago. At that time, my grandmother was still living. My uncle lived in Chicago. And so I got fired, and we went to Chicago. If you go back and read some of the news stories, it will say Duncan fled the state after being fired. I still find that humorous. I didn't flee the state. I was literally just eating turkey with my grandmother, right? But the funny thing is, I tell folks, the very next semester, they let me write back on the paper. And I wrote for it for another 1.5 years until I graduated, which tells you how rogue they really were worried about me in the grand scheme of things, because they let me come right back on. Didn't let me be the editor again, but they continued to let me write for the paper. And what I tell folks is, getting fired taught me more of that through that experience than had I kept that job, right? I learned about power firsthand in many respects. I learned how it works, I learned how it gets abused, and I learned how important it is to push back on that power. Second bit I'll tell you about is Hurricane Floyd. So scientists say most of our memories are flawed. They'll tell you that every time you remember something, it's a copy of a copy of a copy, and over time your memories degrade a little bit, right? But they'll also tell you that there's other memories that don't degrade, because they're so ingrained in your mind that no matter how many times you tell them, they don't suffer that. And I think my experience with Hurricane Floyd is one of those memories that I still remember pretty crystal clear. Hurricane Floyd happened in September of 1999 in Rocky Mount, North Carolina, where after college I went for my first big reporting job. And when Floyd hit, it had created $6 billion of damage, which who knows what that equates to in today's dollars from 1999 money. 52 people died. Communities were totally underwater. At that time, it was the worst natural disaster in the history of North Carolina. The rivers rose. I watched my parking lot where my apartment was literally turn into a river. I literally watched as a chair would go by, a table would go by, a painting would go by, like this giant painting, I'll never forget, just going down this new river, now cut through the parking lot. My car was under there somewhere. I lived on the second story of this apartment building. By the time the waters were done come morning, no exaggeration, you would not have known there were apartments underneath. My deck had become a dock. And when the boats came around and said, get on now, because this water is not going to recede for days, at least, and we're not coming back, so if you want to leave, go now, or you're stuck here, I literally walked right from that deck right onto a boat from my second story apartment. So I stepped off my balcony, I got on this boat, I had my hurricane kit filled with Vienna sausages and SpaghettiOs, and when they dropped me off, I found myself walking among many displaced people. Right? Their homes were gone. They're carrying what little belongings they could. They had no idea where they were going to go, but they knew they couldn't go home as we were surrounded by water. But I went to work because I was a reporter, and that's what we do. I spent the next several weeks reporting, riding with the National Guard, and seeing firsthand entire neighborhoods completely underwater. The river and creek beds surrounded Rocky Mount, and you only had 2 ways into Rocky Mount, North Carolina. It's a town of about 50,000 people. It's also where Krispy Kreme and Carl's Jr. and Hardee's came from. They love their fast food in that community, right? Little town, Krispy Kreme and Hardee's. About 50,000 people. And I want you to imagine a place like Wanamaker Road. Imagine about half that size, they had a stretch like that. And I remember standing on an overpass, and if you hadn't ever been there before, if they had just put you on that overpass, you would have thought it was a lake. The only thing you could have seen was there was one really tall Chinese food sign, and it was sticking out right in the middle. But under all that were stores, a mall, everything, completely covered underwater. So I then lived at the newspaper office for 2 weeks, or for a week, and then I spent another week at somebody's apartment who lived next door. We were still dry there. But for nearly 2 weeks, you could not get in or out of Rocky Mount, North Carolina. It took that long for waters to recede, unless you had a boat or a helicopter. And you had to have a good boat, because people with little boats kept getting stuck because their motors would literally hit the tops of roofs, cars, anything underneath. They were actually telling people, stop boating around. We're having to spend time saving you as opposed to actually helping other people in trouble, even though you're trying to help. But we were printing our paper out of Raleigh now, and they would helicopter it in every day. And remember, this was the late 90s. This was 1999. We didn't have Twitter. We didn't have Instagram. We didn't have Facebook. We didn't have smartphones. So at that time, newspapers meant everything to people. So we would print it, we would truck it in, and we would distribute it all across the city to the shelters and other areas so people could get information. It was people's lifelines. They relied on it for critical news. You know, what was the extent of the damage? How could they find people who were missing? How could they connect with the National Guard and the Red Cross? Where could they get more food and shelter until that was available? All of that came through the reporting we did on the newspaper. That experience at the time reminded me why I became a journalist, but it also showed me up close the real value of public service. Because during that time, besides just the military and the National Guard, I saw lots of other elected officials and government employees stepping up, sometimes imperfectly, but with good heart trying to do the right thing, with some ability to make people's lives better at their worst moment. So it did change in that moment how I viewed the role of government and the role it can play and what's possible when it's actually done correctly. I think the next piece of this is what I will just title, as people do around here, it's Topeka, my dudes, right? I love Topeka. This is my hometown. It's why I still live here. It's why I raise a family here. It's why my wife and I invest in a business here. And we keep working to make it better. Years ago, I was talking to a friend who's an artist by the name of Pam Renovato. She was working on an art gallery project in this project we worked on together, and she looked at me one day and said, "You should run for mayor." I laughed. Like, I really laughed. And then I laughed some more, and then I laughed a little less, and she's like, "No, I'm serious. You should," because we talked a lot. So then I started thinking, no, that you can't be serious. And but then we started talking seriously. She didn't talk about how cool it would be to be mayor. She talked about why we need community voices, why we need inclusive leadership, right? Why we need clear direction and ideas, and we need people who serve in those roles who actually understand the city of Topeka. So this stupid, crazy idea nugging in my head, whether it was mayor or any kind of public role, I started asking other people, and nobody laughed like I did the first time they heard it. Some people said, "Oh, sure, that sounds crazy." Other people said, "No, you should try it." So I kind of couldn't stop thinking about it. So 8 years ago, two things happened, right? The first one is way more important than the second, and that's the year I got married to my wife. We got married actually in the House chamber of the Kansas Capitol, so it was kind of a different experience. I'm surprised she agreed to it and still married me, but we did, and I think a lot of people enjoyed it. But the second thing was I lost my first political race. Now, it was just by a few hundred votes, and it could have technically been my second political race. I did run for student senate in middle school and lost horribly, so that may have been technically my first political race. But I lost that political race 8 years ago. It was a hard loss, right? It was a powerful loss. But here's what happens after you lose an election, right? Nothing, right? The sun still comes up. Your wife still says, "I need you to take out the trash." Your kid says, "Can you just play some Minecraft with me?" Right? Much like getting fired, what I did was learn more from that loss, I think, than had I had a victory. Perspective matters, right? And how we view the world is shaped by the perspective we gain from those experiences. And so that loss gave me a lot of perspective. Since then, I've been lucky to win 2 city council races. Again, I'm running for mayor, right? Gonna try again. Maybe I'll win, maybe I lose. And if I win, great. But if not, I'm still going to be here. I'm still going to be at Topeka, and I'm still going to work to make things better in the ways that I can. I have family here. I have friends here. And there are a lot of people in this town who I went to school with ever since kindergarten. And nobody holds you more accountable than the people you've known since you were 5 years old when they see you in the grocery store and they beeline over to you and they say, hey man, remember that time I hit you with that dodgeball in the face? I'm going to do it again if you don't fix those potholes, right? I mean, that's accountability you can't really get anywhere else unless except for your hometown where everybody kind of gets to know you. Even in a place like Topeka, which I think a lot of people call a big, small town. I have also, much like the rest of you, complained about certain things in the community. I've tried to be productive. I've tried to give back to the community, serving in a variety of ways. This is a city, again, of 125,000 people, but only 10 of us get elected. And what I tell folks is, you can actually probably accomplish much more sometimes by not being one of those 10 than the 10 of us who have some authority in whatever power we have via government. So whether you're one of the 10 or not, you still can do a lot in this community. I tell people I don't have political aspirations. I have no want to go and serve some other community. I just want to serve my hometown, and that's where that's always come from, is just my love for Topeka that fed into that decision one day to say, hey, maybe I should run for office. I still joke, give me a shot, I can do just as bad as the last guy, right? That's kind of I will also say this, I don't know where Pam is these days. I haven't been able to find her, not sure anyone does. Maybe she'll hear about this. Maybe someone out there knows her and can say, Pam, reach out to Spencer, because I owe her gratitude and thanks for pushing me in a direction that before I ever had that conversation with her probably never would have occurred to me. Another piece of this is liars, right? I don't like liars. I'm not sure anybody does, but I definitely don't. It's probably the journalist in me, right? Probably just because I'm a human being. But the truth is, we all lie sometimes. In fact, people who tell you they don't lie are lying, right? That's how that works. And if anyone's had children, we all know the biggest lie is, oh, sure, we'll talk about it later, which really means never happening, kid, right? I didn't mind no comment as a journalist. I don't mind and I don't know, or I can't talk about that. I think people can respect that and understand that. They're frustrating, but at least they're an honest, hey, I just can't talk about these things. But I've always believed that elected officials owe people honesty, especially when the truth is uncomfortable. After I lost that first race, I wasn't sure if I'd run again. Figured I'd take it, see what happened. But then something happened that tipped the scale a little bit. I was president at the time of the Topeka Performing Arts Center. And the city owns the facility, but contracts with an independent board of directors who contracts with a third party to run it. But it's the city's job to maintain it. It's our job to pay for the facility. Twice, I went to the city council member at the time and I said, we need this money. Do you support us? Every time, oh yeah, of course I do. I love it. I'm going to do it. And then twice after those conversations happened, he voted no. That was frustrating because I don't mind disagreement. I do mind the dishonesty of those conversations. I don't mind if we disagree, but I do mind if we can't have an honest conversation about where we stand on an issue. People deserve to hear that from elected officials. So that was what tipped me a little at the time then to say, we at least have to have people who are willing to have conversations. If it's a no, great. If it's a yes, fine. If they can help you, tell me, and if you can't, just tell me why. And I didn't feel like we were getting that, and I felt like this city deserved better than that. I did win that first race by 13 whole votes. It's the second closest race in the history of Topeka, the first being Bob Archer a few decades ago, who won by 1 vote. So I didn't have to sweat it out quite as much as he did, but I did have to sweat it out a little bit. Some people will tell you I talk too much, right? I'm active on social media. I write a Substack. I have a podcast. I speak to the media every time they call me. I'm the only elected official in Shawnee County who holds open office hours a couple times a month, and I'm pretty responsive when people call me, email me, or message me in any capacity. Sometimes we agree. Sometimes we disagree. But I always think it's critical that people know the information when I can get it to them and why I vote or do something the way I do it. And I think you'll even find, because they'll tell me this, that even the people who don't think I'm so awesome, who have issues with me, still will say, he did come talk to me. And I think that's important as we move forward, and something I learned, I think, from that experience of not getting that from my elected official. The story I'm about to tell is one that I wouldn't tell for years, and finally I put it in a column at college. And now I'm told, well, you got to tell this story, all right? It's called The Fifth Period. So let me start with a very simple truth, that I am fallible, and I do make mistakes. And there are votes and decisions in this life that I wish I could take back. We all have certain regrets. So if you're looking for the perfect person and an elected person, good luck. You're not going to find one. If you do, please tell me where they are, and I'll figure out how they do it. Because we are humans, and humans are fallible. The real question is, if we make a mistake, to me, how are we responding to that mistake, right? Do we acknowledge it? Do we learn from it? And do we show that we're trying to correct it? I think that's what matters, not just for an elected person, but for everybody in our life, to give them that grace. But the reality is, failure is part of life. Once you accept that, you stop being so afraid of it, I think. You can embrace failure just a little bit. You start taking risks, you grow, and maybe it helps you lead just a little bit better. I learned this for the first time in middle school during something we called the fifth period. So I went to French middle school, go Falcons, and we had 4 basketball teams. We had 2 A teams and 2 B teams. We had green A, yellow A, and we had green B and yellow B. I, if you're keeping track, was on the 4th team, yellow B. And we had this rotation system. And not only did they not let some of us play during the whole game, they would actually add a 5th period. If you don't know, basketball has 4 periods, not 5. But we got the 5th period. So I finally got my opportunity one day during the 5th period to go play. Duncan, get in there. Woo, here I am. I'm going to go play. So I run into the court. My heart's pounding. I'm ready. I'm running around. I'm catching the ball. I'm passing the ball. I finally get the ball. I'm under the basket. There's nobody around me. I shoot it. It goes in. I score 2 points. I'm so excited. And that's when I start looking around. And my teammates are yelling at me. And the coach is yelling at me. And people in the stands, parents are pointing. Not at me. They're pointing the other direction. Because I scored for the other team. Right? My first goal was for the other team. I'm the 5th period kid, and I just scored for the other team. Right? I'm sure that moment could have crushed me, and it probably in the moment did just a little bit. Right? But I did score a goal later for our team, so that was good. That kind of helped. But I think it taught me something even at a young age that I've tried to carry with me ever since. You're going to mess up. Sometimes you're going to do it publicly, and sometimes you're going to do it embarrassingly, right? But you can't quit. You got to keep pushing forward. You got to adjust. You got to just say, I'm going to do better next time. I promise you, I have a solid list of embarrassing moments in my life. And some of them my pants fell down once at a debate tournament because my belt broke, right? You do these things enough in public and you realize, how much worse can it get? Right? It can't get that much worse when you have these things. I think I said hallelujah once in a very full church during the season you're not supposed to say hallelujah, and I was the only one, and everybody looked at me, hey, we're not supposed to say hallelujah, right? Those are ones where all eyes are suddenly on you, and I know that list is long, and I've done many more. And who knows? For all I know, I've stood up here today, and I've embarrassed myself, and that's fine too. You know, I'll just move on and try again next time. I am proud to call Topeka my home. It's where I was raised. It's where I learned about hard work, about service, about what it means to be part of a real community. It's not just a dot on a map for me, right? This is the backdrop of my life, filled with people who've lifted me up, who've challenged me, who've shaped me into what I am. And that's why I serve this community now and do my best to do that. I don't have all the answers. If you find the person that does, again, God bless them. But I'm not that guy. But I do believe in showing up. I do believe in continuing to learn and in trying, even if it means getting it wrong sometimes. Because at the end of the day, life is not about being perfect. It is about being present, being accountable, and honestly just being kind to those around you. So I know there will be more to my story at some point. And trust me, I am more than interested than anyone else into what that's going to be as I move forward. But I appreciate you taking the time tonight to hear this pieces of my story. Thank you very much.
That was wonderful, Spencer. And let's get that quoted. To get potholes fixed, we just need a dodgeball.
Dodgeball me, man. Just throw me the dodgeball. Thanks for coming. Thank you for watching my story. I hope somebody got something out of it, and I hope people come back every month to listen to other people's stories.
We'll see you next month. Thank you.